The sun sank low over the rugged hills of the Montana frontier, brushing the sky with streaks of copper and gold. The wind moved slow that evening, whispering across the open fields where the tall grass swayed like an ocean of faded green. It was the kind of quiet only found far from towns, where the nearest neighbor might be 10 miles off and the only sound after dusk was the cry of a hawk heading home. That's where he rode, one man, one horse, and one dream of starting over. He'd left everything behind in the last town: debt, disappointment, and the memory of promises that had turned to dust. The papers in his coat pocket crinkled each time he shifted in the saddle. They were proof of ownership, signed and sealed, his new start. A small cabin and a few acres of land, purchased sight unseen from a man passing through the saloon weeks ago. It wasn't much, but for a man with calloused hands and a tired soul, it was something real. A place to rest, a place to rebuild. The trail grew narrow as he climbed the ridge. Pines thickened, their scent heavy in the cold air. By the time he reached the clearing, the last light was nearly gone, and the cabin stood ahead, small, rough-hewn, and half-covered in wild vines. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. He frowned. The man who'd sold him the land had said it was abandoned. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the frost-hardened ground. The horse gave a soft whinny, uneasy, as if it too sensed something off. He tightened his grip on the reins, eyes narrowing. The place looked lived in. Stacked firewood, a worn broom by the porch, and the faint flicker of a lamp through the window. He took a slow step forward, then another. The boards of the porch creaked under his weight. He hesitated before knocking, wondering what he'd find. Maybe some drifter had taken shelter here. Maybe squatters. Maybe the seller had lied altogether. Whatever it wasn't what he'd paid for. He knocked once. Nothing. Then again, louder this time. A few seconds passed before a sound came from inside, light and uncertain. The latch turned. The door opened just a few inches, and in the dim glow of the lantern, he saw her. She couldn't have been more than 20, her hair a tumble of dark curls, her dress worn but clean. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, half fear, half defiance. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The air between them was tight, like a drawn string ready to snap. "This here's my place," he said quietly, voice low and steady. "Bought it fair and square." Her fingers gripped the edge of the door. "No, sir," she answered, barely above a whisper. "This cabin's mine." The words hit him harder than he expected. "Yours?" She nodded once, her chin lifting with fragile courage. "Been here near a year now. My pa built it. He's gone, but this is still home." He took a slow breath, confusion and irritation mixing in his chest. "I bought this land from a man, said his name was Grady, said it had been empty since winter." Her eyes darted toward the corner, where an old rifle leaned against the wall. "Grady," she repeated softly, shaking her head. He had no right. The wind howled outside, slipping through the cracks in the door. He could see the fire burning low in the hearth behind her, smell the faint aroma of stew still warm in the pot. Everything in that cabin, every small, careful thing told the truth of her words. He looked past her shoulder, seeing the life she had made here. Stitched curtains, stacked preserves, and a single handmade quilt folded neatly on the bed. She hadn't just been passing through. She belonged. He removed his hat and sighed, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck. "I didn't come to cause trouble, ma'am. Just came to see what I'd paid for." Her voice softened a little, though her eyes stayed wary. "And now that you've seen it?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crack of wood in the fire. Finally, she opened the door wider. "You'd best come in before the cold gets you. We can talk once you've warmed up." He hesitated, unsure whether it was kindness or caution behind her words, but he stepped inside anyway. The warmth hit him slow and steady like a memory of home. He removed his gloves, watching her move around the room with a quiet grace. "Didn't expect company," she said, stirring the pot. "But I've got enough stew for two." He nodded, not sure what to say. Something about her presence unsettled him, not in a bad way, but in a way that made the air feel different, alive. He watched her set 2 bowls on the small table. Her hands were small, the skin on them roughened by work, but there was a steadiness to her, like she'd faced worse than this and come through standing. When they finally sat down, the first few bites passed in silence. The stew was simple but good. She studied him the way one studies a storm on the horizon, unsure whether it will bring rain or ruin. "So," she said at last, You really paid for this place? I did. Every last dollar I had. And you believe that man? He gave a small, humorless laugh. Seems I shouldn't have. She looked down for a moment, then back up. I can't leave. Not yet. I didn't say you had to, her brow furrowed. Then what are you going to do? He looked into the fire, the orange light reflecting off his weary eyes. That depends on what kind of folks we are. I reckon two people can come to an understanding better than a court can. The flicker of a smile ghosted across her lips, then faded. That might be true. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. The night was closing in, and there was something uneasy in it, a feeling that the mountains themselves were holding their breath. He leaned back slightly, his instincts stirring. You out here alone? Her spoon paused midair. I manage fine, she said. That's not what I asked. She looked away, her voice barely audible. No one else here now? Now? Her silence told him more than words could. He glanced toward the rifle in the corner again. You expecting someone? She met his eyes then, and for the first time he saw the fear she'd been trying to hide. Maybe, she said. Or maybe he's already close. His hand drifted toward his belt, where the cold handle of his revolver rested. He didn't like the sound of that. She must have seen the change in his expression because she spoke quickly. Not what you think. But if you're staying, you should know. Men been coming through here asking questions. About this land. About me. He studied her face, the tremor in her voice, the shadows moving on the walls. What kind of men? The kind who don't knock before they come through a door. The room felt smaller suddenly, the silence sharper. He rose from his chair and walked to the window, looking out into the darkness. The trees swayed in the wind, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw something move beyond the fence line. When he turned back, she was watching him, her eyes steady despite the fear. I didn't want you here, she said softly, but maybe it's good you came tonight. The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks up the chimney. He didn't answer, not right away. Somewhere in his gut, he knew this wasn't just about land or a broken deal. This was something deeper, something that had been waiting in that cabin long before he ever rode into the valley. And as the wind howled through the pines, and a faint sound echoed from outside, hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, he realized that whatever lay ahead, he wasn't leaving that cabin anytime soon, not until he knew who was coming. The sound of those hoofbeats outside made the air inside the cabin feel heavier. They came slow at first, steady and measured, like someone in no hurry but certain of where they were going. The rancher moved toward the window again, careful not to let his boots creak against the floorboards. The woman's hand had frozen over the stew pot, her eyes locked on the door, her breathing shallow. He peered through the curtain. Moonlight spilled across the clearing, pale and sharp. The fence posts threw long shadows across the ground. Then he saw it, a lone rider, a dark shape moving through the pines, stopping just short of the open field. Whoever it was stayed there watching, waiting. How long they'd been coming around? He asked quietly, not taking his eyes off the window. She swallowed hard.
Since spring.
First time they came, they said they were surveyors, just men looking to map the valley, but they weren't. I saw one of them go through my father's things after he passed. Your father, he said, turning to face her. He died here? She nodded. Last winter, fever took him. He worked himself sick after Mama passed. Wouldn't go to town, wouldn't ask nobody for help. Said he'd rather die on his land than live under someone else's roof. Her voice cracked slightly, and she looked down, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. He said nothing, only watched her in the flicker of the firelight. There was something strong in her, the kind of quiet strength that only hardship could carve. So you've been living alone all this time? I have. She glanced up, her eyes tired but clear. And I've kept this place the way he left it. Every board, every fence post. I was hoping to make it through one more winter before I decided what to do next. He nodded slowly. And then this Grady fella comes along, sells what wasn't his to sell. She gave a small, bitter smile. Grady was one of them men who came around asking questions. I figured he was after the land, same as the others, but I never thought he'd have the nerve to sell it. He exhaled hard, rubbing his jaw. Guess we both been lied to. She nodded toward the window. If you're smart, you'll take your horse and go back the way you came. Whatever those men are after, it isn't worth getting tangled in. I've been tangled in worse, he said quietly. A gust of wind pressed against the cabin walls, making the boards groan. The lamp flickered, throwing long shadows that danced across the room. Outside, the horse whinnied again, uneasy. When he looked back through the window, the rider was gone. Whoever it was, he said. They ain't far. Her eyes met his, fear flickering behind them. They always come at night. Never stay long. Just circle the place like they're waiting for something. He turned toward the fire, the orange glow warming his rough hands. They want this land for a reason. You know what it is? She hesitated before answering. Pa said there was something buried out here. Not gold or silver, not anything you could spend, but something worth guarding. He frowned. You believe that? I didn't at first, but they sure seem to. The fire crackled again, spitting sparks. He stared into it, thinking. There were all kinds of reasons men came sniffing around other folks' land. Water rights, mineral claims, sometimes just greed. But there was something different in the way she spoke, something that hinted at more than money. What did your father do before he came here? He asked. He was a blacksmith, worked in a town east of here, but he left after my mama died. Said too many folks had forgotten what decency meant. We packed up and came west with the wagon trains till the horses gave out. Then he built this place by hand. He nodded slowly. That explains the tools I saw outside. She looked up at him curiously. You noticed that? I notice everything, he said simply. The faintest smile tugged at her lips before fading again. He always said this land had a purpose. Maybe that's why I can't leave it behind. He leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. You got grit. I'll give you that. I got no choice. The silence stretched again, filled with the sounds of the wind and the faint crackle of the fire. For a moment, the world outside felt far away, as though the cabin was the only place left standing in a wide, empty wilderness. Then, from outside, came another sound, a low, hollow thud, like a boot against wood. He reached for his revolver, pulling it from the holster in one smooth motion. Stay back, he whispered. She moved closer to the hearth, eyes darting to the door. The knock came again, this time harder. He stepped forward. Who's there? No answer. Just the moan of the wind through the cracks. He opened the door a few inches, keeping his revolver low. The porch was empty, only the dark stretch of forest beyond. But something had been left on the step, a small weathered pouch tied with twine. He picked it up carefully, eyes scanning the tree line before shutting the door behind him. What is it? She asked, voice trembling slightly. He loosened the twine and poured the contents onto the table. A handful of stones rolled out, flat, smooth, carved with markings he didn't recognize. Each one bore a strange symbol, almost like writing but older, primitive. Her face went pale. They left those before. My pa found one by the fence last winter. Said it was a warning. A warning for what? She shook her head. I don't know. But a few days later, our cattle disappeared. All of them. Then he fell sick. The rancher studied the stones, his brow furrowed. You think they did something to him? I don't know what to think anymore. He set the pouch aside and leaned on the table. You ever tell anyone in town about this? Tried once. Sheriff said I was making stories. Told me to sell the place and move east. And you didn't? This cabin's all I have left. He nodded slowly, admiring her stubbornness. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just about pride. Something was buried here. Maybe not gold, maybe not treasure, but something people were willing to scare a woman half to death for. Tomorrow, he said firmly, we'll take a look around. Check the fences, the creek bed, anywhere someone might have been digging. Her eyes widened. You mean you're staying? Looks that way. She stared at him for a long moment like she was trying to figure out whether to be grateful or afraid. You don't even know me, she said quietly. Don't have to, he replied. I just know when someone's been wronged. For the first time since he arrived, her shoulders relaxed a little. She nodded. All right then. Tomorrow. They sat in silence for a while after that, listening to the fire pop and the night settle around them. Outside, the wind had died down, but the woods were still, too still. Later, after she'd retired to her small sleeping space behind the curtain, he stayed awake by the dying fire, turning one of the strange stones over in his palm. The carvings caught the last glint of the flame, their shapes twisting like shadows. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled into something meant to stay hidden. When the last of the fire faded, he stood and moved to the window once more. The moon had risen higher, silver light spilling over the ridge. For a moment, everything looked peaceful. But then, at the edge of the clearing, he saw it, a figure standing just beyond the fence line. Still as stone, watching. He didn't move, didn't even breathe. The figure stayed there for what felt like a long time before melting back into the trees. He tightened his grip on the revolver, jaw set. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. When dawn came, he'd get his answers. But as the night deepened and the sound of distant hoofbeats echoed once more through the valley, a thought gnawed at the back of his mind. Maybe some things weren't meant to be found, and maybe the woman in the cabin already knew that. The first light of morning broke pale and cold across the valley, spreading thin over the pines. The rancher had barely slept. He'd sat most of the night by the window, listening for hoofbeats that never came again, turning those carved stones over in his hands until the markings seemed to move on their own. When the woman stepped out from behind the curtain, the smell of coffee already filled the small cabin. "You didn't sleep," she said quietly. "Didn't feel right to," he replied, glancing out the window. The ground was frosted white, and faint tracks cut through the yard, boot prints leading toward the tree line. She noticed them too. "They came close last night," he nodded. "Close enough to make a point." She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You still plan to look around?" "I do," he said, buckling on his gun belt. "If they want something buried here, I aim to find out what." They stepped outside together. The morning air bit at their cheeks, the kind of cold that burned the lungs. The land stretched quiet in every direction, fields gone dry, a creek glinting faintly in the distance. The fence line looked undisturbed except for those prints. He knelt down beside them, brushing away the frost. "2 sets," he muttered. "Heavy boots." One man taller, wider gait. "Been here after midnight." Her face was pale. "They always come in pairs. I think one stands guard while the other searches." He looked up at her. "Searches for what, though?" She hesitated, eyes darting toward the small hill behind the cabin. "My father spent his last weeks up there," she said softly. "Said he was fixing the well, but he never drew a drop of water from it again. When he died, I covered it with boards." The rancher followed her gaze. "You think he hid something?" "I don't know what to think anymore," she whispered. They climbed the hill slowly, the earth crunching under their boots. At the top sat a wooden cover, old and splintered. The boards had been disturbed, fresh dirt along the edges, one plank pried loose. He crouched and lifted it aside. The hole below dropped deep into shadow. He picked up a rock and dropped it in. It hit something solid after a few feet, not the splash of water, but a hollow thud. "That's no well," he said. Her hand tightened around her shawl. "Then what is it?" He didn't answer. He fetched a lantern from the cabin and lowered it down on a rope. The light flickered off something metal, flat, rusted, and half-buried. "There's a box down there," he said. She stared at him, fear and curiosity warring in her eyes. "If that's what they're after, then we need to see it first." He braced the rope and climbed down, boots scraping against the dirt wall. The air grew damp, thick with the smell of earth and old iron. When his boots hit the bottom, he crouched by the box. It was heavy, its hinges rusted shut. Carved into the lid were markings that matched the stones from the pouch. He ran a gloved hand over them. "Same symbols," he called up. "Whatever this is, it's connected." He wedged the butt of his knife under the lid and pried it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small iron-bound ledger and what looked like a bundle of letters. No gold, no weapons, just paper and dust. He climbed back up with the bundle in hand, setting it on the grass. "This is what they want?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. "Looks that way." He flipped through the ledger. The pages were filled with names, dates, and what looked like transaction notes, some written in fine ink, others scrawled hastily. "These are land deals," he said. "But they ain't right. Some of these names belong to men I know, farmers who lost their land to railroad claims. These were forged." She frowned, confusion clouding her face. "My father wasn't a dishonest man. I'm not saying he was. Maybe he stumbled on something he wasn't meant to find, something that tied those men to land theft." She went quiet, her gaze drifting toward the trees. "You think they killed him for it?" "I think they tried to scare him off, but he wouldn't leave. So they waited for him to die, and when he did, they came for what he left behind." Her hands trembled as she held one of the letters. The paper was yellowed, the ink smudged, but the handwriting was careful. "It's from him," she said softly. "To my mother. He must have written it years ago," she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "If anything happens, don't let them take the papers. The land isn't what it seems. It belongs to more than one man, and they'll do anything to keep that hidden." The rancher took a slow breath. "That explains why Grady wanted this place sold. Clean title, no questions asked." The wind picked up again, carrying the faint scent of smoke from the cabin's chimney. For a moment neither spoke. Then he folded the ledger and letters back into the cloth. "We'll hide these. If they come again, we don't let them near this spot." She looked at him uncertainly. "You really think you can stop them?" "I've done worse jobs with less reason." As they made their way back down the hill, he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Every rustle in the brush, every crack of a branch made him tighten his grip on the revolver. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had risen high, but the air still felt tense. He stepped inside first, scanning the room. Nothing out of place until he noticed the door latch. It hung broken, splintered clean through. "Someone's been in here," he muttered. She gasped softly. "While we were outside?" He moved fast, checking the corners. Everything seemed untouched, but the pouch of carved stones was gone. "They took them," he said, anger flashing in his voice. She sank into a chair, pale as linen. "Then they know we found the well." He rubbed a hand over his face, trying to think. "No, not yet. If they'd seen us digging, they'd have come for the papers, too. They're still guessing." She looked up at him, eyes filled with worry. "What if they come back tonight?" "They will," he said. "But we'll be ready." He spent the rest of the afternoon securing the doors, nailing boards over the windows, and setting up a lantern near the back wall for light. She watched him work, occasionally bringing him tools or nails from the chest. "You've done this before," she said. "More times than I care to remember," he replied. "Were you a soldier?" He paused, hammer in hand. "For a while. Then a ranch hand. Then nothing worth naming." Her gaze softened. "You've been running from something." He met her eyes. "Aren't we all?" The sun dipped low again, painting the sky in shades of rust and violet. The valley fell into quiet, the kind that comes before something happens. She lit the lamp while he sat at the table, studying the ledger. The more he read, the clearer it became. This wasn't just one man's scheme. It stretched across counties, maybe the whole territory. When darkness settled, he doused the lamp. They sat in the dim glow of the fire, listening. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Then came another sound, softer, closer. A creak on the porch. He motioned for her to stay still. The door handle twisted slowly. He raised his revolver, heart pounding steady and sure. The door opened halfway, and a man's voice came through, low and deliberate. "Easy now, friend. We ain't here to cause trouble." The rancher didn't lower the gun. "You already caused it. Step inside slow." Two men entered, the same kind of hard-faced riders he'd seen in mining towns, eyes cold, hands never far from their belts. The taller one smiled thinly. "Heard there was some confusion about the land. Thought we might clear it up." "You mean take it," the rancher said. The man chuckled. "Depends on who's asking." His eyes drifted toward the woman. "You must be the daughter. Shame about your pa. Good man. Just mixed up in business that wasn't his." Her voice shook. "You knew him?" "Knew him, worked for him, same thing." "Worked," the rancher repeated. "You mean stole from?" The man's smile faded. "Careful, friend. We ain't here to talk long. Just give us what we came for and we'll be gone before dawn." "And what's that?" "The papers," the woman's breath caught. "We don't have them." The man stepped forward, his tone turning colder. "Then I'll have to search myself." Before he could move another inch, the rancher cocked his revolver. "You'll take one more step and won't live to take the second." The room went still. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the man's smirk returned, but his eyes stayed dark. "You're making a mistake, cowboy. You don't know what you're standing in the middle of." "Maybe not," the rancher said. "But I know I don't scare easy." The men exchanged a look, then back toward the door. "We'll be back," the taller one said. "And next time we won't knock." When they were gone, the woman let out a shaky breath. The firelight flickered against her face, catching the tears she tried to hide. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Not until they get it." He holstered his gun slowly. "Then we give them a fight they won't forget." Outside, the wind rose again, and through the darkness came the faint echo of laughter. Men on horseback, circling the cabin just beyond sight. And as the sound faded into the trees, the rancher knew the night was only beginning, and the real war for the cabin had just begun. The next few days passed under a sky that couldn't decide between winter and spring. The clouds hung low and heavy, moving slow across the mountains like smoke. The rancher worked without rest, patching the fences, setting traps along the back trails, keeping watch from dawn to dark. The woman barely left the cabin, though she helped where she could, hauling water, grinding coffee, tending to the small fire that never seemed to die down. Neither of them said it aloud, but both knew the men would come back. At night, the woods turned restless. Sometimes the horses in the corral would start kicking, their eyes rolling white. Other times they'd hear faint voices drifting through the trees, men talking low, their laughter carried by the wind. Each morning brought new signs: tracks too close to the cabin, a fence post cut clean through, once even a spent cartridge casing glinting in the grass. The rancher didn't like being hunted on his own land. He'd known men like this before, the kind that didn't talk about killing because they'd already made peace with it. He could feel the tension in his bones, the quiet before something broke. On the fourth morning, he found smoke rising from beyond the ridge. "They've set camp close," he said, tightening his belt. She looked up from the table, worry darkening her eyes. "How many?" "Can't tell yet, but it's more than 2. He watched her clutch her shawl tighter, her face pale in the cold morning light. "You said your father used to trade in town," he said. "Who'd he deal with? Anyone who might know about those papers?" There was a lawyer from the county seat. Used to come by once a season, bringing news and ledgers. Said he was drawing maps for the railway company. My father helped him mark boundaries. "That's it," the rancher said. "Those papers. Your PIA probably found proof the railroad's been grabbing land illegally. Those men out there aren't just thieves. They're working for someone who wants this all buried." Her hand trembled slightly. "You think the sheriff's in on it too?" "I think the sheriff's smart enough not to get in their way." He glanced out the window again, jaw set. "We'll need to make them think we're still inside tonight. When they come, we hit first." Her eyes widened. "You mean fight them?" "I mean survive them," he said simply. By noon, the sky had turned dark with low clouds. He spent the afternoon gathering what they'd need: a spare rifle, a few shells, and a small oil lamp that burned strong even in the wind. They hid the ledger and letters in a hollow behind the fireplace, then packed a small bag with food in case they had to run. As dusk settled, he doused the lamps and left one faint light burning near the window. The fire's glow made it look as though they were still sitting inside. Then they slipped out the back door, moving silent down the slope toward the tree line. From the ridge they could see faint flickers of light, campfires, maybe 3 of them, burning steady against the dark. The sound of horses carried through the wind. He crouched beside her, whispering, "Stay close to me. If anything happens, head for the creek. Follow it till you reach the bridge. Understand?" She nodded, her breath visible in the cold air. "And you?" "I'll find you." They waited in the brush until full dark. The moon rose slow and silver, catching on the frost like scattered glass. Every sound felt sharper now: the snap of a twig, the whisper of grass underfoot. Then came the sound they'd been waiting for: horses approaching, hooves muffled in the soil. The rancher tensed. Through the shadows he saw the glint of lanterns swinging from saddles. 4 riders this time. One of them carried a rifle across his lap. The men stopped just short of the cabin. The taller one, the same man from before, dismounted first, looking toward the dim light in the window. "They're still in there," he muttered. The rancher recognized his voice instantly. He motioned for her to stay low, then crept forward, silent as the wind through pine needles. From behind a tree he could hear them clearly. "Burn it," the tall man said. "We'll dig through the ashes for what's left." Another voice answered, rough and uncertain. "What if they're still inside?" The tall man gave a short, cold laugh. "Then we save time." The rancher felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. His hand tightened around his revolver. Before the man could strike a match, the rancher stepped from the shadows and fired. The shot cracked through the night like thunder. The match fell and chaos broke loose. Horses reared, men shouted. The woman cried out his name, ducking behind a fallen log as bullets tore through the trees. He dropped to one knee and fired again, the flash lighting the darkness for a split second. One of the men went down hard, his lantern shattering beside him. The tall man dove behind a barrel, shouting orders. "Circle the back." "He's not alone." The woman crawled closer to him, breath ragged. "They'll flank us." "Not if I move first." He took the rifle, sighted through the dark, and fired again, once, twice, each shot echoing across the valley. The second man fell, but there were still 2 more. The smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air. Then the woman gasped, pointing toward the ridge. Another light, more riders. 2, maybe 3, coming fast. He cursed under his breath. They brought more. They fell back through the trees, ducking low branches, moving toward the creek. The sound of hooves thundered behind them. The rancher fired once more to slow them down, then grabbed her hand. "Run!" They splashed into the shallow water, the cold biting through their boots. The creek bent sharply toward the east, leading into a narrow ravine. They followed it until the gunfire faded, replaced by the echo of shouting in the distance. When they finally stopped, both were breathing hard. The woman sank onto a rock, clutching her shawl. "They'll burn the cabin," she whispered. He shook his head. "Let them. Everything that matters is hidden. But if they find the fireplace, they won't," he said firmly. "Not yet." The moonlight shimmered off the water, catching the silver in his hair. For a moment the world felt quiet again, though the danger still lurked close. He crouched beside her, eyes scanning the darkness. "We'll wait till dawn, then double back. See what's left." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Why are you helping me? You could have ridden away days ago." He hesitated before answering. "Because once someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. Maybe it's my turn." She stared at him for a long moment. And in that silence, something passed between them, something unspoken, fragile but real. Before either could say more, a sound cut through the night, a low whistle, distant but familiar. It came again, closer this time. He froze. "That's their signal." The woman's eyes widened. "They found us." He pulled her up quickly. "Keep moving. Stay low." They followed the ravine deeper until the land narrowed into a small clearing surrounded by rocks. He stopped there, scanning the shadows. "We can make a stand here," he said. "They'll have to come through one way." She looked terrified but nodded, gripping a small pistol he'd handed her earlier. "I'm not afraid to fight," she said softly. "I know," he replied. Minutes stretched like hours. The woods were alive with the faint rustle of branches, the whisper of movement. Then came the flicker of lantern light again, bobbing through the trees. "Over there," a voice shouted. The rancher raised his rifle. "Stay down," he said, then fired. The bullet struck a tree, splintering bark inches from the man's shoulder. More shots followed, flashes lighting the dark in bursts. The woman ducked behind the rocks, returning fire when she could. Her hands trembled, but her aim was steady. One of the riders fell, his lantern spinning through the air before shattering on a rock. Flames flared briefly, throwing wild shadows across the clearing. The tall man's voice rose above the chaos. "You think you can stop us? You don't even know what you're fighting for." The rancher shouted back, "Then tell me!" The man laughed darkly. "You wouldn't believe it if I did. Your fights with ghosts, cowboy, with men already dead." The words struck like cold iron. The woman looked at him, confusion and fear in her eyes. "What does he mean?" He didn't answer. His mind was already racing. Ghosts. Dead men. The ledger. He realized then what it might mean. The records were of men long gone, their names used to steal land for years after their deaths. It was bigger than either of them could have imagined. He reloaded, jaw clenched. "Doesn't matter what it means." "Not tonight." The gunfire flared again, echoing across the valley. Sparks flew where bullets struck stone. The woman's pistol clicked empty, and she ducked behind him, shielding her head. He turned, pulling her close. "Stay with me. No matter what happens." Then from behind them another sound, hoofbeats. Fast and heavy. He swung around, heart pounding. Another rider was coming from the far side of the ravine, a lone silhouette against the moonlight. For a breathless moment, neither side moved. Then the rider shouted, a voice unfamiliar but commanding. "Hold your fire!" The gunfire stopped. The men hesitated, looking toward the newcomer. The rancher and the woman exchanged a glance. The rider dismounted, walking slowly toward the light. His coat bore a deputy's badge dulled by dust. "Looks like I came at the right time," he said, his voice calm but cold. The rancher didn't lower his gun. "You with them or me?" The man's eyes glinted under his hat brim. "That depends on who's telling the truth." And as the silence stretched, the wind carried the faint smell of smoke from the burning cabin, twisting upward into the night sky. No one moved. Not yet. The next breath, the next word, the next trigger pulled would decide everything. The rancher stood still, gun in hand, his breath fogging in the cold night air. The woman's fingers clutched the edge of his coat, trembling, not from fear alone, but from the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The rider with the deputy's badge stepped closer, boots crunching over dry leaves, the faint glow from the dying fire lighting his face. He was older than he first seemed, his eyes marked with years of knowing too much and saying too little. I'm Deputy Holt, the man said quietly. I was sent from the county seat. Heard talk of men riding under false orders, taking land that ain't theirs. He nodded toward the tall man and his remaining riders. Looks like I found him, the tall man spat in the dirt. You're too late, Holt. This land belongs to the company now. You can shoot me, but it won't change a thing. You think they'll send one man to fix what's already been signed in blood? The deputy's jaw tightened. Maybe not. But tonight, we're stopping this part of it. The rancher's voice broke through the tense silence. They've got proof hidden in my cabin, the kind that shows what they've done. The fire might have taken some of it, but the rest is safe. The tall man's smirk faded. He looked toward the smoldering direction of the cabin, realization dawning in his eyes. So that's why you were fighting so hard. You've seen the ledger? The woman stepped forward despite the danger, her voice steady. My father kept those records. He was killed for them. You sent those men, didn't you? The man's sneer returned, but his silence told the truth. The deputy raised his pistol. That's enough. Drop your weapons. One of the riders twitched, his hand moving toward his belt, but the rancher fired first. The shot echoed and the man fell. The rest dropped their guns. For a long moment no one spoke. Only the wind moved through the trees. Deputy Holt motioned for the rancher and the woman to stay back while he stepped forward to collect the weapons. This ends here, he said quietly, looking down at the tall man. You'll answer for what you've done. The tall man's eyes burned with defiance, but the fight had drained from him. You don't get it, Holt, he said bitterly. They'll bury you for this. You can't take down men with money and railroads in their pockets. The deputy gave a faint, tired smile. Maybe not, but I can start. He tied their hands, then nodded to the rancher. Help me take them to town at first light. You've done enough for one night. The rancher holstered his gun and exhaled slowly, the tension of the past days finally easing. Reckon I'll need a new cabin, he said quietly. You'll have more than that, the deputy replied. Once those papers are read, the county will have to face what's been happening here. Maybe this land will finally belong to those who worked it. The woman stood beside the rancher, silent, watching the stars flicker faintly over the ridge. She felt exhaustion settle deep in her bones, but also something else. Peace, maybe, or the beginning of it. By dawn, the storm had cleared. A pale light stretched across the valley as they rode toward town, the prisoners tied behind them. The smell of smoke lingered on the wind from what remained of the rancher's cabin. When they reached the crossroads, the deputy paused. I'll take them from here, he said. You two go back. You'll be needed once the judge sees those papers. The rancher nodded, handing over a small pouch of coins. For your trouble. The deputy looked at him for a long moment before shaking his head. Keep it. I didn't come for money. Then he spurred his horse and rode off toward the horizon, the sun rising behind him. The woman and the rancher turned back toward the valley. They didn't speak for a while, letting the silence stretch between them like something sacred. When they reached the creek again, they dismounted. The land looked different now, quiet, stripped bare, yet full of life waiting to return. He glanced toward where the cabin had been. Guess I'll have to start over. She looked at him softly. You built it once. You can build it again, he smiled faintly. You sound like you plan to stay long enough to see it. Her eyes met his. Maybe I do. For the next few weeks, they worked side by side, rebuilding what had been lost. The townsfolk came to help once word spread about the papers. The judge confirmed that the ledger held proof of illegal land seizures stretching back years. The railroad's men were gone soon after, some jailed, others vanished into the plains. The woman's father's name was cleared, and his old ranch deeds restored. She stood over his grave one evening, the sun sinking low behind the hills, and whispered, It's done, Papa. They can't hurt us anymore. The wind moved through the tall grass, gentle as a hand on her shoulder. Life settled slowly into rhythm again. The rancher's cattle returned, the fences stood straight, and the scent of wild sage filled the air after rain. Some nights, when the stars were clear and bright, he'd sit on the porch and watch the horizon. The woman beside him, both quiet in the comfort of shared survival. But even peace carried its memories. There were moments he'd wake in the dark, hearing echoes of that night, the gunfire, the shouting, the fear, and wonder how close they had come to losing everything. And each time he'd reach for her hand, feeling it warm and real beside him, and the world would right itself again. One evening, months later, she found him by the corral, fixing the last of the railings. The light was soft and golden, dust turning the air to fire. You never stop working, she teased. He leaned on the fence, smiling. Land doesn't take care of itself. She stepped closer, the corners of her mouth lifting. You know, when I first came here, I thought this place was the end of my story. Turns out it was the beginning. He looked at her, his eyes kind. Sometimes the wrong road takes you exactly where you're meant to be. They stood there for a long moment, the silence filled with the rustle of grass and the soft sound of horses breathing. The sky stretched wide and endless above them, painted with the fading colors of day. That night, they lit a small fire outside the new cabin. The stars shimmered, and the air was sweet with pine. She handed him a cup of coffee and said, "You never told me what made you help me that first night." He looked into the flames, then at her. "Maybe I saw something in your eyes," he said softly. "Something that reminded me why I stayed on this land in the first place." She smiled faintly. "And what's that?" "That some things are still worth fighting for." She leaned closer, the firelight dancing across her face. "Then I'm glad you fought for me." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining like roots finding home in the earth. The wind carried the faint sound of an owl from the hills, a song of endings and new beginnings. In the months that followed, the ranch became more than just land. It became a place of healing. Travelers passing through spoke of it as the home by the creek, a ranch rebuilt on truth, where the ghosts of the past no longer lingered but watched quietly from the hills. And when spring finally returned, bringing wildflowers across the valley, the woman stood on the porch one morning and watched the sunrise. The light touched the fields, turning them gold. She closed her eyes, feeling warmth spread through her chest. The rancher stepped out beside her, wrapping his arm gently around her shoulders. "Beautiful morning," he murmured. She nodded, smiling. "It is. Feels like the world finally remembers how to breathe again." He looked out at the land, at the hills that once carried danger, but now promised peace. "Maybe it always did," he said quietly. "We just had to listen long enough to hear it." The creek murmured softly in the distance, and the horizon stretched wide and endless before them. They stood there side by side, watching the new day rise over the valley that had once held so much pain, and now, at last held promise. The story of their fight, their courage and their love would fade with time, told only in passing by those who remembered the days when the railroad men came and the ranchers stood their ground. But the land would remember, and in its quiet way, it would keep their story alive, carried in the wind, whispered through the tall grass, and written in the golden light of every dawn that followed.